gentlemen, welcome back to Shoot, Punch, Kick, the only podcast in the world where three local Brooklyn heroes talk about 80s and 90s movies that form the bedrock of their heroism. Today, Anthony, Telly, and I are strapping on our chainsaws, loading up our shotguns, and taking aim at the Deadites to save the world from Evil Deads 1 and 2. Gentlemen, welcome. How are you?
Good. Ready to start 2025 with some goddamn carnage.
Telly, how you doing, my brother?
Ditto, man.
I like it. I like it. A man, a few words. Mm-hmm. So today on our show, we're gonna do something a little different. We are covering two movies this time. Evil Deads 1 and 2. And reason for that being that Evil Dead 2 is kind of just a bigger budget remake of Evil Dead 1. And we figured it'd be interesting to compare and contrast them. So just a little bit about the franchise. Evil Dead created a franchise that has spawned 3 separate remakes, 2 proper sequels, a TV show, multiple video games, comic books, even a Broadway musical, and has helped propelled the careers of both Raimi and Campbell. Yeah, there's an off-Broadway musical which I am truly disappointed that I did not get to see, because I imagine it would have been amazing. It would have been either great or terrible, but I feel like even if it was terrible, it probably would have been pretty great. So, gentlemen, before we get started with synopsis and everything, we usually like to start with a little bit of background on our own personal histories with these movies. So, Telly, why don't you get us started?
So I saw Army of Darkness first. Because when it came out during that period, every week I went to the mall and just went to watch a movie. Had no idea what Army of Darkness was. Didn't know about the Evil Dead movies. So I was kind of lost watching that film. And then a couple years later, I actually rented Evil Dead 1 and 2, watched them back to back, remember enjoying them, but I haven't gone back to them since. So this was a great journey back. But always been a big Bruce Campbell fan. I've seen him at conventions. He's hilarious.
He's an icon, man.
A brilliant actor, great personality, and surprised he's not a bigger star, especially after watching these movies again.
Yeah, I have pretty much same background. I remember being a kid. I don't know if it was my dad who told me that, but for some reason going in, I thought he was the white dude from In Living Color. And when I got there, I was like, that's definitely not Jim. Yeah, because seeing it was before Ace Ventura and all those things. And
they all look alike, huh?
But I remember as a kid having like a lot of fun with it. I mean, like it was live action like Looney Tunes, and you know, I think it was maybe 3, which would have made me 9. And I remember that, the skeleton from Army of Darkness. I didn't see Evil Dead until I worked in Hollywood Video, and those I watched back to back and had a good time with them. And I think I was at the time starting to get a little bit more knowledgeable about like behind the scenes stuff. And the big thing about Evil Dead was that it was, you know, a low budget movie. So it was really cool to see that, especially, you know, with our background making films together and, you know, starting to see what like different scopes of indie movies were. So I had them both on the Evil Dead's on tape.
Yeah, and I'll say it was great watching it in especially the first Evil Dead movie. Being able to watch that in HD now, because when I first saw it, it was like a shitty like VHS copy.
Yeah, and they remastered it and everything too. Right?
Yeah, just kind of seeing these old movies again in HD is also a great experience.
Yeah, it's funny. To your point, Dash, I was listening to the special features on the first one, and you're saying like how it kind of harkens back to, you know, us as kids kind of making movies too. Like apparently Raimi, Tapert, and Campbell, all 3 of them were high school friends and grew up making little movies, little student films on Super 8. Right, so there's some parallels there that I really dig. For me, this was one of these movies that I'm sure I've mentioned plenty of times. My uncle, right? He's
we gotta get him
got
on
me into the movies. Yeah, we do. Unfortunately, you know what? Shout out to you, Uncle, because I know you listen, man. We need to get you on here, but this is not a kind of a story I'm sure he's going to want me to necessarily tell. But this is one of those movies where he used to discipline me by making me watch scary movies. So it was always like, yo, act up, and I'm going to put on American Werewolf in London, keep acting up, and I'm going to make you watch this or that. And so, and I'm not sure which one it was. It might have been a combination of the two, but either Evil Dead 1 or Evil Dead 2 or maybe both, were some of those movies that he occasionally would threaten to make me watch as a kid, and I had seen them because I guess I don't know if he thought I was asleep, on the couch or something, and he'd watch them, and I just kind of watched them between closed eyes. But I forgot the name of the movie, or I didn't know there was no internet, right? And so when I finally got some friends who were into movies, horror movies, namely you guys, I didn't know how to name this movie. And so how when you hear a song and you don't know exactly who sings it, but you have like the melody in your head and you try to do your best to like sing it to somebody.
Movie Shazam.
We need it because there's no movie Shazam, right?
Yeah.
And so I was just like awkwardly relaying certain vague scenes that I remembered to you guys, and you guys are like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, right? And chances are, because this is pre-Army of Darkness, you guys probably didn't watch it either, or hadn't seen it at that point anyway. And even when I saw Army of Darkness, I did not put two and two together that this was a sequel to those movies that I remembered. It wasn't until I was already in high school, I had moved down south, and I had cut class with a friend of mine. And we went back to his place, just, I don't know, 40s and blunts type of shit, right? And on the background, Evil Dead 2 is playing. And all of a sudden, like a lightning bolt, hit me. This is the movie I've been trying to get,
Yeah, that like Back to the Future moment. You remember that movie I was talking about? Listen to this.
So I'll always remember the minute I finally got Evil Dead kind of back into my life, because it was like a song I've been searching for years. And then when I had figured out what it was, that's when I did the backstory and realized that Army of Darkness was the sequel. And then that's actually when I really found out about Raimi too, because all of a sudden I'm looking and I'm like, wait a minute, he's done Hercules, he's done all these things, and I love all these things, and that's kind of what that moment is very special in my head, because it solidified having that movie back in my life, but also it made me bond with my homie, right? Because thank you for this, thank you so much. But also it helped me realize what was going on with the Raimi sphere. So if you can't tell by the fact that I picked this or how effusive I'm being, this is a kind of a special series for me coming up. So having said that, one of the first things that we always kind of like to do here is we begin with giving our AI overlords over at ChatGPT a chance to flex their muscles and give us some plot synopses. So this should be interesting, again, considering that part 2 doesn't really follow from part 1. It's more of a bigger budget remake. So let's see what they said. So Evil Dead 1981 was released worldwide, but actually, strangely enough, it didn't hit America till 83. That's a story we could talk about later. But 5 friends, Ash Williams, his girlfriend Linda, his sister Cheryl, and their friends Scott and Shelley travel to a remote cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway. Inside the cabin, they discover an ancient book called the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, Book of the Dead, and a tape recorder containing incantations that summon demonic forces. When they play the recording, they inadvertently release malevolent spirits that possess Cheryl, turning her into a Deadite. One by one, the group is attacked and possessed by the demonic entities, leading to a brutal and grotesque confrontation. Ash is forced to fight for his survival as his friends succumb to the evil forces. By the end, Ash appears to be the sole survivor, but the final shot implies the evil is far from defeated. Ooh. So that's 1. What do we think about how well it did for 1? Any notes? Anything that stuck out to you? The one thing that stuck out to me is that in the book, the first movie, the book isn't called the Necronomicon. And for the life of me, I can't remember what the name of it is right now, but I noticed they were watching the first one again, that it's not called that. They call it something else. But other than that, pretty on point. Yeah. So let's move on to book 2. Evil Dead 2, released in 1987, a sequel and partial remake of the first film. Evil Dead 2 begins with Ash and his girlfriend Linda returning to the same cabin. This time, the movie retells the events of the original film more concisely before diving into new territory. Ash battles Linda after she's possessed by the demonic forces, ultimately dismembering her in order for him to survive. Ash is then tormented by the spirits in the cabin and begins to lose grip on reality. His own hand becomes possessed, forcing him to sever it with a chainsaw. Meanwhile, new characters, including Annie, the daughter of the archaeologist who studied the Necronomicon, and her companions arrive at the canyon. Together, they attempt to banish the evil by reciting passages from the book. The battle intensifies, and in the end, Ash is sucked through a time portal opened by the recited incantations. He finds himself stranded in the Middle Ages, setting up the events of Army of Darkness, 1992, the third installment in the series. Not bad, ChatGPT, if I do say so myself. What do you guys think? How did they do?
Yeah, got it.
Sounds right.
I don't know what else to say. Good. All right, so let's go into initial reactions of the movie, just in a broader sense. And again, we're going to try to keep these two movies together, right? So let's start with you, Telly. Give me your impressions of 1 and 2 and how 2 kind of relates to 1.
First one, for a no budget horror movie, I thought it was really good. All things considered. Very rough around the edges though, but you could see there's a lot of potential there from Sam Raimi, because like things just kind of happen. The scenes are not really set up. Stuff just kind of happens, and there's no real build up in many of those situations. Second one, rewatching it again, I remember watching it the first time being very entertained. Watching it again, entertaining, but I realized there's like really no story. At least there's nothing to really follow, because you've got just scenes of like Bruce Campbell being wacky, and the first half of the movie is just him in the cabin, just kind of being tortured, and then people show up, people get possessed, and then after I watched it, I realized I watched it again. That I put it on the next day, and I forgot like the order of the scenes, because there just doesn't seem to be like a progression in terms of a storyline. I'm like, oh yeah, that happened first, and that person got possessed. So I think that's the only thing I would ding it with. But it's obviously, you see the growth of Sam Raimi between the first and second one, and then obviously finding his style and his voice cinematically and visually. Bruce Campbell, I think, especially in Evil Dead 2, just a real showcase for his talent, and almost experimental in the way that it kind of just does away with any kind of real plot, and it's just like almost like a fever dream. But also, I was just talking to Dash about this. What's interesting to me is that the Ash that we know and love doesn't really appear in the first two movies. In terms of his personality and all that kind of stuff. That happens later. And it's very similar to the fact that Jason in the hockey mask doesn't show up until Friday the 13th, part 3. So I thought that was interesting going back and watching it again. I'm like, oh, wow. Ash is not like that kind of like chauvinist buffoon in the first one. He's also not quite there yet in the second one.
But more so probably.
But it's funny how like the mind just kind of like rewrites history, and you think that he's, because I always thought that Ash was Ash in Evil Dead 2, but he's not really Ash yet.
Dash? Ash?
Watching these in both of them, I just feel like this reminded me of we covered Desperado on the previous podcast, and it just really felt very El Mariachi Desperado. Very similar beats, very similar setup. It's technically a sequel, but almost like a reboot. And watching Evil Dead 1 and 2, you definitely see the evolution of filmmaking, and it's a demo for Sam Raimi's directing. I mean, I think watching it, I was super impressed with the camera movements, really impressed with like they just start throwing stuff at you like miniatures, stop animation, stop motion, just a lot of things that are done very well. I think technically from a low budget point of view, it's super impressive. And then when you get to 2 and you're like, okay, what do you do with more money? It doesn't disappoint in terms of utilizing all these tricks that, the demon cam, like, just that there's that whole opening, like when you see that in the first one, looks really cool. Cause it was really tough to watch this isolated from what was out at the time. It's like kind of listening to a hip hop rapper, right? Like they might be doing very basic rhymes, but when you think about like, oh, in 1982, like that was revolutionary at the time.
Pivot,
yeah,
pivot.
you know what I mean? So like when you see that camera movement in the first one, you're like, oh shit, that's like really dynamic. And then when you get to the second one and it's moving through the house and it's like this long take, you're just like,
and
goddamn,
he's reacting to it.
Yeah, you're like, that's really dope.
Yeah.
So really love that. But it felt like a reel. You know what I mean? It felt like, hey, look at what we can do with the technical part. Neither movie has a story. Neither one of them. They're just beats after beats. And the thing that really like killed it for me was there was all this impressive filmmaking stuff, but like throughout I almost really couldn't care because there wasn't enough to anchor those moments to me for anything. To anything. There wasn't like characters I was really rooting for. There wasn't like an exploration of like multiple locations. I think one of the things that didn't do it a service for me was watching them back to back, because it wasn't like, oh, we're back at the cabin, let's see what we're doing. Like one ended, I put the next one on, and it was just 3 hours in this cabin. But a really technical marvel, I thought, of just like it felt like a punk movie, you know what I'm saying? Like just very we're gonna make some shit with the homies and have fun doing it. And I think the one thing with that was like that was super clear that it looked like they had a blast making this.
Funny enough, actually, they did not have a blast making this. Apparently, this movie was, well, at least the first one, was extremely painful for them to make. It was the middle of the winter. They were out in the middle of the woods. Everybody was getting sick. Everybody was getting injured during the making and stuff. But I get your point in that the idea of a bunch of friends, high school friends, who are now, mind you, Raimi was 20 when the first one came out, right?
Crazy.
And they made this for a budget of about 300. Well, so the crazy thing is, they went and started filming with a budget of $150,000 to make that first movie. Eventually, that budget ballooned after filming because they needed to edit and post-production stuff. But, all in, imagine, you and your three best friends from high school decide, you now graduated college and said the first thing I want to do now is let's make a movie. I think a lot of their classmates were getting intern jobs at studios, and basically what Raimi was saying was like, I don't want to do that. And I think his contemporaries a little bit before him, but contemporaries nonetheless, were George Lucas and Spielberg, and they kind of came out of the bat with amazing movies that captivated larger audiences, and they didn't have to come up through the ranks of a studio starting off as an intern or a PA. And so they said that they were motivated by that, like, hey, we're gonna show the world horror on a shoestring budget. And it's obvious. When I watched that first movie, it doesn't look to me like a low budget movie. It almost looks like a student film. Like that low budget of a film, right? And some of the acting and stuff in it, and the writing and the script also screams amateurish, even below the level of most B movies that we'd see that came from a studio, right? And rightfully, this is mostly a self-paid for film. So while it has a lot of issues, and it's very amateurish, I absolutely love the first one because, to your point, I love this idea of like, high school friends making a movie, and some really impressive stuff came out of it that later created foundations for other movies that are down the line. Two, ratchets it up a bunch of notches, and I think is a better movie, although it's not as impressive, I think, as the first one for, considering the budget and stuff. This, kind of had studio backing, and so they were able to do more, so I expect more. And they definitely, I think, did a whole lot more. I find both of the movies to be extremely fun, if academically bankrupt, right? There's nothing about it, like to your point, there's no character development, there's no plot development, there's none of that stuff really matters. It's just kind of slapstick, off the wall, crazy horror comedy, which I love. And so I love them both. So, I mean, I think that really brings us into an interesting point about just the story of the concept, right? The idea of trapped in the woods in a creepy cabin all by yourself. Again, I don't know if that's the first time that we've seen that before. And with.
I mean, almost definitely not. It's we reviewed. I mean, it's a reboot, but that's pretty much the premise of Night of the Living Dead. So.
And I think Sam Raimi admitted that that's basically one of the inspirations, like a one location movie and a bunch of people.
Well, one location is one thing, but I mean, even Night of the Living Dead, they were out on a farm or whatever, out on a farmhouse. But something about Cabin in the Woods, and it's a small little space. Like, Raimi in Night of the Living Dead, they had a full house, right? When they had a basement and there's other rooms where like. This is like my apartment in New York, right? But out in the middle of the woods. But just from a conceptual basis, okay, Cabin in the Woods, and I don't know that there's any other kind of monsters that we've seen before. They're not really zombies, right? These are monsters that are out to kill you. They've taken over your friends, but they're smart. And I don't mean smart. I mean, like, they like to fuck with you. They can talk to you. They'll communicate, kind of like Freddy, but if there was like 30 of them or 5 of them. Or whatever. So what do you guys think about conceptually the idea of this cabin in the woods? You're isolated with. I thought of it kind of like The Exorcist. If The Exorcist was 5 people who were taken over by Pizzazu, and you were locked in a room with them, and you had no way to get out.
Yeah, to me,
and also the idea of like Book of the Dead, right? Right, and it's just like you stepped into the trap yourself by like, hey, there's a book here that will raise the dead, and if you just read them, oh shit, let me read them, or let me listen to the tape of them being read. So I don't know, just talk a little bit of your thoughts about it conceptually, how it came together, or maybe it didn't.
Yeah, to me, I felt the first one was Night of the Living Dead, The Shining, and The Exorcist. Put that in a blender, and you get Evil Dead, the first Evil Dead. I think the problem with the first one, if you want to start nitpicking, is just that there is no characterization at all. Like, the characters are all completely interchangeable. They have no personalities. They're just there, and then each one gets possessed. But it's like you don't really know like one person from another. But again, I think what you admire about the first one, and you have to look at it understanding the backstory, like the same way you would watch the first El Mariachi movie, is like, okay, these guys made this movie with no money, and this was a purely independent shoestring film. And with that context, it's a very enjoyable film.
Yeah, see, I'm in the opposite camp with that, because I agree with the first half of what Telly was saying in terms of everyone being interchangeable, being interchangeable. The problem that I have with that is that's the part that requires no budget. That just requires a better script. And I thought the script was the worst part of it, because with all of the effects, it couldn't save there. Like, I didn't think there was anything narratively that was creative about the house. There's no character arc. There's not really much like creative use of the space, so with that limited thing, I get like, okay, we can't leave here. There's a reason for them being confined to it. But aside from that, like, if you think about any other movie that's a single location movie or a confined space, you can take something like Clerks, you can take something like even the Exorcist to that extent. There wasn't like clever dialogue, there weren't any kind of like interesting dynamics between anyone, and what it just left me waiting for beat after beat after beat. And it, like, I was surprised by how short the movie was, because I kept checking how much time was left, and I was like, oh, when I put this on, it's like 85 minutes. And then I'm like, God damn, like, how is there still a half hour, 45 minutes left? The premise of it, I thought, could have been fine. Like, I think it just had to explore that. So I have no issue with the premise. I think they could have totally done that. But for me, love how it was directed, but just surprised because that's the part that didn't add to the budget. So it could have been $1,000, like, having interesting characters wouldn't have added anything.
I mean, that's funny though. I just want to, for context, this is also coming from the guy who thought that when we were watching Broken Arrow, that there was character development in Broken Arrow. You're right. Like, there was any kind of,
Well, the thing is with that is, I feel like we didn't think it landed, but it was there and something was intended for it. This one just didn't have it. So, for example, with Broken Arrow, like whether you find that $20 bill a great piece of filmmaking is whatever.
There's a necklace. There's a necklace. They loved each other so much.
But there's 3 beats throughout it, and the reason why I liked it in Broken Arrow was because it was cheesy. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like, oh, this really like sold it to me. Like it was like the comedy aspect of it, of that for me. And the most interesting thing that I found was when I went to look at like the Letterboxd reviews of the stuff, that's one, like every negative that I have with it was people like, man, there's no character, I don't fuck that.
Yeah, those are positives, and everyone's
it. So it's like
everyone's positive. Yeah,
you know, so
it's a feature, not
like,
a bug.
Yeah, exactly. So you know,
you give it. I cut it some slack because of, you know, these are a bunch of kids making this movie, and up until you know, until like the 80s or even 90s, you know, you didn't have like young people making movies because they
Raimi was 20.
Exactly. But that's, you know, that was a revolutionary thing, I think, going into a certain era of filmmaking. And I think when you're 20, you're still a kid, and you don't really know the world yet, and people and motivations and what's going on in other people's heads. So I kind of forgive it, knowing that these are a bunch of, like, you know, kids fresh, still in college, making this type of film. When the second one comes along, that's where, like, there is some characterization. At least you could tell them apart, but obviously they're not very fleshed out characters.
Yeah. I also just want to give a quick shout out just to the idea of the Deadites as they are. Again, yes, it's derivative. It is literally The Exorcist combined with, like, you know, a lounge stand-up comedian, right? But just the idea of something like Jason or Michael Myers attacks you, and it's this, like, or the Terminator attacks you, and it's this heartless, you know, animal that, you know, you can't really communicate with. There's no, like, talking to. And Freddy, I always loved because it was like, you could talk to him, and, you know, it's not going to do you any good, but, you know, you could talk to him, and there's an intelligence behind, like, he's not killing you just because he's an animal, you know, on instinct. He's killing you because he hates you. He wants you to fucking die. And so but Freddy was always, like, intangible, and you're in his world, and he can, like, kind of do whatever. And I just like the idea of a Jason or a Michael Myers who would do a fucking funny line before he kills you. The idea, like, I'm going to talk shit to you as I killed you, I think is really, really cool. And I just love the Deadites as villains, as a concept. So I definitely want to give a shout out to them. And also, I think it's kind of, though, silly, and again, not to nitpick, but if you're given a book and you're told this book is specifically made to raise the dead and bring some evil shit about, here are the incantations. Yes, you may not have said it yourself. It's a recording. But at a certain point, when you're listening to the recording and he starts doing those incantations, I don't know, pause the shit, fast forward a little bit, and see how the shit worked out, you know, before you do anything else. So I thought that was a little silly, but
no, I mean, personally, I thought that was like a little bit of clever writing, right? Like, what, you know, they can't read this ancient text, so I thought that was a little bit of a cool loophole into how, you know, how would these like if we were in a cabin and we can't read it, like that kind of makes sense. So I thought that was a little cool twist with it.
A cool little Easter egg too is it's the same tape recorder in both movies. I don't know if you guys caught that. And so yeah, let's move over. I mean, again, we were kind of talking about Raimi, and Raimi, I think at this point is kind of an icon. Some of the things that go to Raimi's credit is Army of Darkness, of course, that we discussed. Darkman, The Quick and the Dead, all the first 3 Spider-Men. I actually really love Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, even though that's maybe a hot take. Drag Me to Hell. He's responsible for Hercules. He's responsible for Xena. He's responsible for Dash's favorite TV show, Spartacus.
I hate Spartacus. But you know what I was surprised to see that he was the creator
Mantis.
of? Yeah.
Mantis. I know you were going for Mantis. That was going to be the next one.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Man, he was a producer on Time Cop.
Yeah.
He was a producer on Time Cop the movie, and he was the head. He was a director on a bunch of episodes of the Time Cop TV series.
Oh shit.
And so he was a producer on The Grudge, right? And so I'm going through all these things, and I just love everything that's included on here to varying degrees. Which is just to say that like anything that Raimi's a part of, I kind of I know I'm going to be a fan of. It's something about his creative style, the shots, the angles that he does, the kind of crazy zooms, the speeding up of time, the kind of way the characters joke with each other. I am just a huge fan of his, and I think the first one was a showcase of, talent. Like the idea, like you mentioned, about the point of view of the evil coming towards him. Apparently, they just had two cars. They put the camera on a 2x4 and they just drove the cars together with rope. In 2, he gets a little bit more crazy with it, where now he's actually doing point of view shots or he's seeing other people react to that. And he's just all over the place. I'm a big fan of both. Telly, why don't you get us started? What do you think of the direction? I mean, you kind of already touched on it, but a little bit more about the direction on both of them.
Well, they're two very different movies. First one is pretty serious. It is serious. It's not funny. It's not meant to be funny. Ash isn't like this comedic, icon or hero. And then the second one is just like wacky and nutty. And it's weird kind of watching both of these again and just seeing like, wow, how did it go from Evil Dead 2 to Spider-Man? Because I could see little flourishes of Raimi style from Evil Dead 2 carry over into Spider-Man, but very different in terms of
I see it a little. Okay. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, yeah. Because obviously that's a huge studio movie, so he's got to tamper it down a little bit. But it's obvious that there's a filmmaker, an auteur behind these movies, and I think it was great that he got opportunities to continue to prove himself, because I think after the first Evil Dead movie, it was like, okay, that's a nice low budget horror movie. Maybe you could do more of those. And then he continued to progress his filmmaking, opened up the scale and scope of his movies. I did watch Army of Darkness again. I know we're not reviewing that, but if you guys out there in the audience want us to review it, let us know. But just to see how these films continue to kind of like build on each other. And also he went on to make bigger movies with bigger budgets, while still, preserving his style, which is really cool to see. But yeah, just kind of going back and just watching these again, realizing, the first one is not because when we think of Evil Dead now, we think of, comedy, Bruce Campbell being an asshole, but those are not there that's not there at all in the first one. Second one is starting to emerge, but it's also not the Ash that we know and love, which is like, again, just very fascinating to realize watching these rewatching these.
Dash,
I can see that. Like, it reminds me a little bit of like the evolution of like a Jay and Silent Bob, right? Like the intention in Clerks is like, they're just kind of like the C-3PO and R2-D2. Like they're not the main thing. And then like wall. They were like, the people love them. And like, I think going from like 1, they were like, here's this movie. And then by 2, it almost feels like there should be a studio audience, right? Like Bruce Campbell shows up and everybody's like, woo, he's that kind of thing. For me with in terms of the directing, both of them I think just feels like someone that you just want to give money to. Like it was a very similar, like even watching El Mariachi, like when you see it, you just see the potential of someone that you were like, I wonder what this guy would do without a limited constraint. The thing that I had with the difference is with Desperado, I felt like that was El Mariachi with a budget, where Evil Dead 2 was a big tonal shift. And even just with some of the stuff, like there weren't that many implications that is what he would do with more money. Like there was a part in it where I was like, oh shit, that's a miniature. Like that's a house miniature. And they started doing stuff with, like big branches hitting stuff. And like just from the offset in the beginning, I wouldn't think that he was like a miniature user, for example. Like just
he did some stop motion in the first one, but I see what you're. But
to that degree, like I think that it felt like a departure. It went from a low budget horror movie to a Looney Tunes movie, And with some of these things, it became like, is this my style of film? You know what I mean? And I think the one thing that's undeniable is the ability to direct, do a special effects, have like a kinetic camera, like be able to take a mundane space and make it look. And that's where you want to give someone like that money, because you're like, if you can make a cabin look like this, what can you do with a city? What can you do with such and such? Going from this to Spider-Man, Darkman was in between, and you can see a lot of the like. I seen what you did with Darkman, and you can tell how he directs Willem Dafoe as the Goblin, because I watched the first Spider-Man again. Those shits are straight up horror beats. The way he films the Green Goblin is, with the like the voice in his head and the way the camera pushes in, it's very comic.
Yeah, I definitely see a through line from
and multiverse
from
is horror too.
Darkman to Spider-Man versus like Evil Dead 2 to Spider-Man.
Yeah, so with that, I thought the direction was really cool. In Evil Dead 2, there were some moments that like really jumped out at me early on to set the tone. Like once there was that mirror beat where he's talking to himself, and you don't know that that's like actually a double. And and then when the camera turns around and he reaches out, I was like, yo, shit! Like I thought that was like just so well done. And there's just so many moments that are just like, you just want to see what he does with scripts and his ability to.
I watching like Evil Dead 2 in the first 30 minutes where it's just the Bruce Campbell show basically, and I'm like watching that and just appreciating that Sam Raimi's like, I don't give a fuck. I think this is going to be funny and interesting, and I don't care if there's no story here, and we're not. I'm not following any rules in terms of like setting anything up at all, because that whole subplot with the people showing up, that was just completely random. I think it would have been interesting to just have it be entirely just Bruce Campbell in the cabin by himself.
Well, so that's an interesting point about the pacing, right? So one thing so the first movie, again, as far as direction is concerned, I'm a huge fan, and I like some of the crazy shots he was using. He was getting creative with certain like sound beats and stuff, and again, you're right. Absolutely, I agree with both of you when you say that. Watching that first one, all you see is like a talent. And look how much he could do with so little. In the second one, one of the things that really struck me was the pacing was so weird, where it's like a little bit of a intro for the first 5 minutes, but then like literally within the first 6 minutes of the movie, he's like killing his girlfriend, burying her, seems to already kind of know the rules of the world and like what's going on, which is awkward for what's ostensibly supposed to be a remake. And so I did a little bit of research. And apparently, he never intended to make Evil Dead 2. The ending of Evil Dead 1 was supposed to be the demise of Ash. That last shot of the evil like coming at him, he was supposed to be dead. And the movie made a lot of money overseas, but it wasn't as huge of a hit here. But it made some key fans like Stephen King and Dino De Laurentiis, so that he could make the second one. In that time, he sold the rights to the first one to a distribution company. I forget which one, Canon or something. And what he did was he sold the rights to just that movie, but he did not sell the rights to the world, to any of the characters, or to anything like plot related. So he wanted to make, when they finally came to him to make a second movie, he couldn't use any of the footage from the first movie, or even really relate to any of the events that happened in the first movie. So, but they wanted to capitalize on the success of the name of the first movie. So he tells a funny story that when he showed the first movie at a screening, he had one of his college film professors look at it and tell him, and the college professor hated it. He absolutely shitted on him and was like, you can't have a movie that's 5 minutes of setup and the rest, The Exorcist. That's literally what he said to him. So, in the second movie, he, on purpose, I feel like I didn't hear the special features, but literally in this next movie, he had to find a way, and even ChatGPT recognized how the setup is right? It said more concisely set up this, the background, right? And so within the first 5 minutes, you've gotten the background on the book, where it came from. You've met Ash and his girlfriend. You saw them dance around. She got turned into a fucking zombie. He chopped her head off and he buried her. That's like I looked at it. It was like the 6 minute mark.
Yeah.
So it felt a little frenetic. Like what the hell's going on here? So though after reading that quote, I think it makes a lot of sense. I kind of feel like the Raimi was saying "fuck you" to his old professor, right? Because it's literally the timing is too perfect. And then the rest of the movie, I just really like that he had the balls to just say "fuck it." I'm just, again, to your point, like some people see some of the lacking in characterization and plot points as a bug, but for me, I kind of see it as a feature because in this movie, the second movie, they really stopped trying. It wasn't as much of a typical horror flick slasher. The second one was a little bit more mental, and it felt like the evil was trying to drive him crazy. So you get all these really crazy shots, close-ups. You get, again, him looking at the mirror. It gave Campbell a chance to do some of the physical stuff that he was doing. And I respect his ability to say, you know what, I'm just going to throw some crazy stuff together. I mean, these movies got X-rated. The first one was X-rated because a lady got raped by the woods.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
It's very bloody. The first one, it's very gory.
And gory
in a low budget way. But it's a lot of blood.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, anyway, I'm a big fan of his. What you despise about the movie is something that I like because it's one of those like, fuck it, we're just gonna do some crazy shit.
I definitely, it's not so, and the thing that it's not that I despise it. It's just it lacked it. Which we all agree, yes. And it just becomes 100%. Whether without that, if it keeps you engaged to keep going throughout it. So, for example, like the movie that everyone like audibly despises, despite being major hit, is like an Avatar, right? Like that's a tech heavy showcase of camera work, special effects, etc. But has a plot throughout, sci-fi implications, things that happen with the characters, like something. So in the, it's wrapped in this, what could be called a cliche storyline and plot beats, but it's something to see throughout that. I saw an interview with Matt Stone and Trey Parker. They did a talk at NYU, and they were talking about like writing a story. And he said,
South Park developers, for our listeners who may not know who those people are,
and the start of basketball,
no, but they were talking about how they write an episode, and he says, look, if you're the words that you put in between your plot beats are the words "and then," you don't have a story. He's like, it's either therefore or like but. Like, something happens because of something else.
There's got to be some connective tissue.
And with this, it was, and then they go to the cabin, and then the girlfriend, and then he buries her, and then these people show up, and then this, the woman runs away. And with that, it was just like, okay, and which it sucked because you had all these really cool elements to do shit, but it just seemed like the script was like, how do we make a tree come through the window? How do we have this happen? And I don't care how we get there, it'll just happen. And unfortunately with that, it like kind of took away with that, because like I wouldn't mind, what and it's not really related. You ever see the music video for Tool Sober? It's like very claymation,
stop motion.
If this movie was like 5 minutes of all that shit happening, I'd be like, this is brilliant. You know what I'm saying? But the problem is it's being drawn out for an hour and a half, that I have to sit through those moments in between getting to the other ones, and you now have to keep getting me back in. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing to like kind of ride me through in between beat to beat, unfortunately. So I didn't despise it, but the lack of it being there, like there's a reason that it's there in other movies.
On that note, Dash, because I think in the first one, it's clear that like Raimi he can't quite do suspense yet and build up. And I think that's probably what was also still lacking in the second one, where, you could have had like sort of like done something like The Thing and build tension and who's possessed, who's not, whatever. But it didn't seem like that was quite in his wheelhouse yet. So it's just like random people getting possessed, chasing each other around. And it didn't really like occur to me until I rewatched it a second time, like I said earlier, where I forgot the sequence of scenes because there's like no progression from one scene to another. It's just stuff starts to happen, which is fun, but it feels like more. I mean, I appreciate the second one, like almost like an experimental film where it's like you're not watching it for a story, but it's also like a roller coaster where you enjoy it while you're watching it, but afterwards you're not going to be like talking about it for like hours and hours.
The most telling thing 100%. I thought was because when I watched this, I was like not blown away by the movie as a whole. Technically, I was. Right. So I was, I went on, Letterboxd, and I also started like looking at like some YouTube reviews, and I saw one, not a full review, but a quick interview with Quentin Tarantino where he talked about it, and another one with Guillermo del Toro where they talked about it, and they almost exclusively talk about the production of it. Right. And that's the thing where, like I shouldn't need to be an insider to enjoy it, or like enjoy it with the caveats of like, well, like with those things, they should add to the lore and the, the mystique of it. Like, the Kevin Smith selling his comic book collection to make it, the $7,000 from Robert Rodriguez. And, Quentin Tarantino and Guillermo del Toro are like, two of my favorites. And I don't disagree with them, but Guillermo del Toro said that he talked to James Cameron about it. And James Cameron said it was the most important film language camera pitch movie in the last 15 to 20 years. Now, that's what, before reading that, I was like, this is a really good tech reel of like, look what I can do. And on that, 5 stars as, in comparison with the script, which I felt lacking, with the acting, which I felt lacking, with like these things. It's
you
tough
watch your
to
mouth
have.
About Bruce Campbell.
Well, I mean, the thing with that is like, even with that, I think I like Bruce Campbell as an idea, and for like some of Evil Dead 2, like I
let's talk about him. Let's talk about Bruce Campbell. We haven't gotten there. Go ahead, Greg.
I know him as an icon. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And going back to see that, I'm almost surprised that he was as big as he was, because
really,
aside from, I mean, and this is actually now that I'm saying it, I think a big part of that is because I didn't rewatch Army of Darkness, and I think that lent, the most of the, because to Telly's point, like he wasn't Ash in these.
Yeah, but even like physical physical stuff. You weren't impressed by some of the physicality he was showing at least in the second one?
Well, the thing with the second one, and it's a taste thing, so it's very Buster Keaton, Three Stooges, and I'm just not a fan of that. Like, even when I watch like Jackie Chan, those are like my least favorite parts, where he like falls and he's like, oh, I just knocked myself in the head. Like, I like Jackie Chan kicking ass.
But he don't want no trouble.
He doesn't want any trouble. So it was like, a big part of this movie was like the one thing that's like not really my bag.
Well, that's a Raimi thing, because he's always been more into comedy than like
slapstick.
Like what I know about the legend of the Evil Dead, the first one, was that Raimi wasn't necessarily a big horror fan, but he realized that the way to kind of break into money to independent cinema is through a horror film. And in the second one, you can see he's trying to be more funny. But I couldn't help but think, like, watching the second one, I'm like, the better version of this movie is Peter Jackson's Dead Alive, where there is a story and there is like more like set pieces versus everything happening in one place. Although I still appreciate Evil Dead 2, but I think, thinking about it again and seeing it over, watching it again, I realized there's a reason why I never went back to it, and I've never really also gone looking for scenes from the second one, because I couldn't remember anything, because it was just it's kind of a blur. But it is impressive because, and Dash, to your point, I feel like the first one is like a proof of concept to the second one, and the second one is sort of a proof of concept of
him as a director.
Sam Raimi saying, "Hey, I could do bigger things beyond this as well." So they're great. They were great calling card movies, and I think you got to appreciate it for that.
100%. Like that again, like seeing that, I'd be like, yo, this guy could film whatever the fuck. You know, like imagine you like, if you know that you have this guy as a director like on your roster, you're like, yo, we can write whatever and this dude will make it look dope. And that's what, and you could like, I remember the first time I saw Spider-Man, I had goosebumps when this motherfucker was climbing up the wall. I was like, yo, I've never seen anything like this and this is exactly what it needed to be. And it literally ushered in the next 20 something years of filmmaking. And when you see like, an Evil Dead 2, what he was doing with the camera and stuff, you'd be like, I believe that person, you could give that person like a Spider-Man script for, a completely almost new medium and be able to achieve that. But I don't believe he could have written that, written that.
Right.
Spider-Man.
No, definitely writing, not strong suit. But Carlos, to go back to your point, because Bruce Campbell, I love him just as a cult figure. Not so much of his, he's become a caricature of himself now. But I always thought he was a very versatile actor, because I know him, like I first saw him in
Maniac
in
Cop,
Darkness, and then Maniac Cop. And Maniac Cop, he's
Escape from LA,
straight. And then he started doing more of the goofy kind of roles that he's known for. But Ash as like the guy that works at the supermarket with the one-liners and all that.
Smart.
Yeah,
smart.
Yeah, but he doesn't show up. Yeah, he's not in these first two movies, strangely enough.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think he's iconic, and yeah, maybe some of it is biased just because of I know who he is. So even in the first movie, was he particularly stand out? Maybe not.
He
so
did
much,
look like Jim
but
Carrey
I just like
from Dumb and Dumber when he was in the backseat of the car and had that bowl.
The bowl cut.
Like, that's Jim Carrey from Dumb and Dumber.
I got to go back and check.
I didn't the cabin. Yeah,
I didn't catch that. I mean, the thing is, but even in that first movie, there were certain bits that I don't know if he meant them to be funny or if they just were funny because I'm supposed to laugh. You know how like there's some comedians, like I feel like if I met Will Ferrell, I would just be ready to laugh. Like, because he's a comedian that I really like, and I feel like, what would be the biggest pattern interrupt was if I met him and he was extremely serious. And like, so like even little lines, like I think my favorite line in the first movie, was he's going into the kitchen to grab some more bullets or whatever, and the head of his ex-girlfriend Linda is there, and she's like, I'm gonna kill you, I'm gonna eat your soul, and he just goes, shut up, Linda, as he's filling his gun. And I just found that to be the most hilarious thing in that whole movie. And again, it's a simple throwaway line, but I loved it. And in the second one, some of the stuff that he's doing in the POV shots, I don't know that anyone had ever done anything like that. I mean, Buster Keaton, yes, the pratfalls, the jumps, Charlie Chaplin would do crazy stuff, but the use of kind of doing that in first person, and what that requires, also like, some of the physical stuff, him fighting his own hand, is just brilliant to me. And to see that, I don't think that I had seen anything like it. As a matter of fact, even tonally, I would argue, I'm sure that they were horror comedies before this, but I don't think any that had this style.
No, again, I mean, this is the hippity hop, right? Like, I mean, we've seen Idle Hands. We've seen, since then.
Subsequently,
we've seen a lot, and this movie is the OG. This movie gets a lot of credit for being like one of the first horror comedies, which is pretty crazy to think of as something that there's been so many of them.
And Sam Raimi, though, he does give credit to like some earlier Hong Kong movies that were sort of horror comedies, like an old Sammo Hung movie called Encounters of the Spooky Kind. And in Hong Kong, those movies at that time, they mixed like, the hopping vampires and stuff like that. They always mixed kind of a horror and comedy because they never really did straight horror in Hong Kong movies. So I think that's why like Sam Raimi was, ended up as the executive producer of Hard Target, and he was going to jump in if John Woo, apparently Universal was ready to have him jump in if John Woo wasn't able to kind of handle his first production. But I think that's the brilliance of a filmmaker, is able to take his inspirations and elevate them to a different level.
I mean, and to the horror comedy point, like even something like the amount of blood, especially in the second one, had another movie ever done that? Just like gratuitous, like there's slasher movies that take themselves very seriously that there would be like gushing blood, but like the idea that the wall would empty out and just cover him in fucking, like a monsoon of blood, which became a staple for the franchise going forward.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've seen movies do it subsequently. That seems like some anime shit, maybe that's what. But I doubt Raimi.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah, okay.
It's a different context, but you could say like Carrie, and in terms of the volume of blood, you could go back to The Shining, even though it doesn't like drench anyone in that blood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the wall coming through the walls, but yeah, but this is I don't know, just feels more visceral. And then again, it just it gets over the top, so that by the time you're getting to the show, it's just and even in the remakes, right? Like even I actually really like the 2013 remake.
Same.
I haven't seen either of those.
I really
like both the remakes.
The second one was okay, but it was just different tonally than I was expecting.
The thing that I like about it was, it has some of the staples, right? Like, very bloody, super bloody. Mm-hmm. But, I thought like with those, it had some of the, like, a couple different locations. I think one of them had like a kid. So, they had like two kids. So
that was the most recent one. Yeah.
Yeah. And, so things like that kind of add some sort of dynamic. There's a parent thing now. It's in it's an apartment building. So, they did elevate some of them while going to, I think, the 2013 that when I remember seeing that in theater, and people were like, doing all this, and when she gets the chainsaw, people were cheering. So they were like they set up a lot of staples of the franchise that paid off for people 30 years later at that point, which is super impressive to have something that speaks to a theater 30 years later is really insane.
Absolutely. I mean, again, I had next that for us to kind of talk a little bit about the special effects, but I feel like we kind of have been talking about them throughout this conversation. But if there's any special mentions or anything that you guys thought were especially cool, what do you think? Anything, Telly? Anything comes to mind?
Good makeup, the stop motion, I appreciate it. All the stuff going on with the hand was like fun, But I think it was consistently good, the effects in the second one, for like an 80s movie. So obviously without any CGI or anything like that.
Head and a Vice is always a good kit.
And for a low budget film. So no, just overall, just really good for what it is. And what's the great thing about watching these movies again? You realize that movies will never be made like this again, right? Because of CGI and everything. So it's wonderful to kind of see what people did before everything was computerized.
You know what? Maybe
and also too, like just in terms of like pre-Steadicam, like that camera flying through is a technical marvel. You know what I mean? For something that's not I don't want to say it's like a throwaway, but it's not the movie, right? Like there's times where you see something when there's like an upgrade in tech, and that's the film, right? Like
everybody was doing after the Matrix. They were doing the bullet time, right? Like,
and they use it like 5-6 times throughout, and it's stuff like that. And with that, it was like a couple of moments, not overdone, hits you with like another thing, and it almost felt like, especially with like Evil Dead 2, as if like he didn't believe he would ever get to make a movie again, where he left it all, in terms of like the effects of like the just things that. Going from the mirror of like, hey, if we have a space here, we can do this. If we chop off his hands, we can have this interact with that. If we have a miniature of the house, then that means we can do such and such. And it was just like moment after moment of like, oh shit, like it makes sense that the filmmakers were so inspired by it, and Guillermo del Toro, because it's really tough to not think about the production when you're watching it, because it's front and center. It's not subtle, but it's done so well that it's like
undeniable.
You can't not talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, also one of my favorite lines with the with the hand, he cuts his hand off and he throws a bucket over it to like trap it. And then he's got a bunch of books on top. I don't know if you caught the book on the top was A Farewell to Arms.
No, that's why.
Yeah. So yeah. All right. So I mean, I feel like that's a great encapsulation of how we thought. Do we have any before we start getting into like the box office numbers and some reviews, are there any like last minute comparative thoughts between the two movies, or any like Easter eggs that you wanted to mention? Is there anything that struck out to you? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Nada.
No, not too
that
much.
we got through it
in great length. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about how the movie did. So for Evil Dead 1, it came out overseas in 81, but didn't come stateside until 83. And again, Wiki says the budget was about $375, and it made $4 million at the box office. But the special features, Raimi said they only got about $150,000 before they started filming. Actually, they had to do this thing with, like he was saying that the thing about investors is that no one ever wants to be the first investor, right? And then once you get some investors in, then others will join. And so he had to do this thing with his first investor where the money that the guy invested, which was like $50,000 or $40,000, which is a big chunk of it, was in an escrow account. And if he couldn't manage to make another $90,000 from other investors, then that money would wind up going back to the investor and everything would get shut down. And he wound up having to like borrow some money from his brother. Like this movie, that first one was really a labor of love. It's really impressive. So to think that, after that initial investment of $150,000, they still had to wind up putting another like $200,000 because they had issues blowing the film stock up to a different size so they could be shown in theaters. They had to go and refilm some things. They lost the location. Apparently, that barn burned down. It was crazy. And it wound up making about $29 million all set in worldwide. So, I mean, $29 million on $375,000, I think in anybody's book is a huge win, even though $29 million doesn't sound like.
I'm curious to see, with once it's adjusted,
inflation.
Like, that's got to be a mega hit. Come on.
I mean, and then especially, I mean, that's just box office totals. That's not even considering DVD rentals or, VHS rentals at the time. Because I was looking, and apparently the year it came out, it was the number one video rental, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And so, pretty good. The second one came out in 87. This time they had a budget of about $6 million, which again doesn't seem like a whole lot of money, but when compared to the $375, the first one, it's leagues larger. And it made about, I'm sorry, I mixed that up. It's $3.5 million that the budget was. It made $6 million. Again, not that much, but about $45 million worldwide. Mm-hmm. It's crazy to think that like we think of our territory as like the most important one, but movies make the majority of their money outside of the States.
I was going to say. Not too much now.
So let's look at some reviews. Evil Dead 1 got an X rating, which was a problem for it being distributed here. Maybe might account for why that number seems kind of small for how much money they made here in the States. But it got an 86 on Rotten Tomatoes and a 71% on Metacritic. At the time, it was not reviewed by Roger Ebert, or at least I couldn't find the review from Roger Ebert. But I will say at the time, the Los Angeles Times called the film an instant classic, proclaiming it's probably the grisliest well-made movie ever made. We also like to take a look at Letterboxd and see. I usually take 1 5-star and 1 half-star. So the 5-star comes from Amaya. And Amaya says, this movie does not give a shit about anything, but it looks so damn cool. I reiterate, it does not give a shit. You can take your story arcs and go get fucked by a tree.
Now, what was the rating on that?
That was the 5-star.
Okay.
That was the 5-star.
Because that's a crazy thing. Like
that sounds like a half-star.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like a half-star. And then the half-star review says, I think this is the only instance where the reboot is miles better than the original because what the fuck was this? That was from Callum.
That was probably a young person. Probably a millennial.
So, fuck millennials. Unless you guys are listening, in which case I love millennials. And Evil Dead 2 was going to get an X rating, but De Laurentiis, at this point, they had some studio backing, so they were a little bit more adept at kind of maneuvering around stuff like that. And so apparently you can just release a movie and release it unrated and leave it up to the theaters if they want to carry an unrated movie or not. And it got an 88 on Rotten Tomatoes and a 72 on Metacritic. Roger Ebert at the time gave the film 3 stars out of 4, describing it as a fairly sophisticated satire that makes you want to get up and shuffle. He praised the film's sense of surrealism, comedic timing, and grubby low-budget intensity. Ebert states that if you know it's all special effects, and if you've seen a lot of other movies and have a sense of humor, you might have a great time watching Evil Dead 2. It's funny. Earlier, Dash, you were saying, or maybe it was Telly, mentioning how this is like an ode to some of those classical non-CG effects, practical effects. And again, if that's kind of my thing. So maybe the reason why I love this so much more than you guys do is just because of how much it is of a showcase of practical effects, including stop motion, including, a bunch of other techniques. Where was I? Okay, yeah. So on the reviews, again, on the Letterboxd, the 5-star rating for this says, apparently, this is a reboot of the first one, but I like to think Ash was just dumb enough to bring his new girlfriend to the cabin for round 2.
Yeah.
Which I love because that's actually the premise of the TV show. In the TV show, it takes place 30 years after the events of Army of Darkness, and he's working at S-Mart still, and basically he meets a really hot girl, and they're hooking up in his trailer. And he tells her the story. She doesn't believe him. She dares him to read from the book. And because she's hot and he's all coked up, he does. And then you get 3 seasons of awesome Ash vs. Evil Dead. The half a star, the hater review, was from someone called Double the Fall. And the review says, "This is terrible. The worst horror movie I have ever seen."
Damn.
Boo this man. All right, guys. So at the end here, we typically like to spend one more minute just talking about what our favorite scenes from each movie was. Dash, why don't you get us started?
You like to do that. I don't like to. No, I'm just playing. For this one, my favorite scene was the mirror. I think it set the tone of the scale jumping from one to the next when it comes to horror and comedies. I think that the unexpected is always the move. And I was literally shocked at that part because I thought it was just so masterfully set up that I was not expecting the reflection to not match Bruce Campbell's, back.
Yeah,
and I was just like, it's that they use that for like Terminator 2 and the special scene with the body doubles, and it's just like we've seen it before, it's been done, but that was an example of you put something that's been done in the right director's hands and it's fresh and new and well executed. And I think that's one of those moments where that'll stick with me from these movies.
Awesome. Telly?
I guess Ash getting his chainsaw hand. And just kind of seeing that and knowing how iconic that would become, and just how off the wall that idea was. Because you look at that scene in isolation and watch the first movie again, you're like, this it's completely incongruous. But the fact that Sam Raimi was just going for broke, that's what I love about that.
Yeah, for me, I have one for each movie. In the first one, I really liked the first reveal of the Deadite where they're playing cards, guess the card, and the Deadite one starts to read out the cards, and she knows the cards. And then when she finally does show up, she kind of like levitates. She does that scary levitate where you're like with your chest facing the ceiling and like holding down, and she does that voice. And I just thought it was a really cool way to introduce the Deadites as characters. So I like that most in the first one. And in the second one, my favorite scene, again, to Telly's point, is where he gets the chainsaw. And not even so much because of what it would create, but I think it's the first appearance or the first time that you hear the character say, groovy. And I love it. Right? That's my favorite catchphrase of his.
Ash was like, the genesis of Ash.
Yeah, that's
because it's funny in the first one where some of the characters are calling him Ashley, and it's like,
he's
not.
I forgot that his name was Ashley too. Yeah. I forgot that his name is Ashley. All right, guys. So that brings us to the end. I would say, Dash, even though maybe this wasn't the best experience for you with the Evil Dead movies from a story perspective, if you do decide to watch Army of Darkness again and you have fun with it, like I suspect you probably will, I couldn't give a higher recommendation than the TV show.
Okay.
I think the TV show really follows, and the things that you were having issues with about these two movies, I think are largely addressed in the TV show. Because I mean, you can't have 3 seasons of a TV show without there being characters you care about, story arcs. Right? He creates a little squad. You really start to care for his squad. So and
I'm sure that's even addressed in Army of Darkness. Like there's more locations, more characters, like goals, for the characters. So I plan on at least watching Army of Darkness, and then when my TV show backlog is somewhat clear, checking it out.
No doubt. All right, so with that, Telly, why don't you give us your score?
First Evil Dead movie, I give it 3 tree rapists out of 5. And for Evil Dead 2, I give it 3 toothless rednecks out of 5.
Also the same score. Okay.
Same score, because I enjoyed them equally for different reasons.
Gotcha. All right, Dash.
Nice. For Evil Dead 1, I'm gonna I'm sorry, I gotta give these fairly low scores. Evil Dead 1's getting a 1.5 bowl cut out of 5. It didn't have all the really impressive special effects that the second one had. No story, even worse cast and acting. Didn't have the Ash by himself doing all that cool stuff. It was just moment after moment with not much to keep me going with that one. The second one I thought was an improvement, but again, if it was a 10-minute, maybe even a 20-minute short, I would have given it a high score. But I have to give it 2 severed hands out of 5 because the special effects couldn't carry on the duration of it. And the thing that bothered me is the writing. The thing that would have elevated it was free. You know what I mean? The budget. I don't want to judge it on a budget curve because the writing and some notes and feedback would have made this a super classic in my eyes.
I think he's just a little salty because of the executive decision scores from last week. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Nah, it's Broken Arrow hate.
That's what it was, Broken Arrow. You're right. So for me, I think it's been pretty clear how effusive I've been about the film, both of these films. So maybe it's a little unfair, but I'm going to go with the first film getting 3.5 Necronomicon incantations out of 5. And I'm going to give a 4 Necronomicon incantations out of 5 to the second film. With that, I believe the choice for our next film will go to Telly. Take us away, Telly.
Okay, so for next one, I want to watch something I haven't seen yet, but I've been meaning to for the past 35 years. And Carlos, your beard has inspired me. So we're going to go back to the land of Chuck Norris. And we're going to do Invasion USA.
Oh, wow. You've never seen Invasion USA?
Nope.
I would have thought that you would have seen that. Okay.
No, not a Chuck Norris fan. So just kind of using this podcast as a way to explore his filmography.
Nice. I've never seen it either.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for spending this time and going over this film with us. We really appreciate it. If you like the content, please comment, subscribe, and also share. We'd love to get this community going a bit larger. And if you have any recommendations or films you'd like us to cover, please let us know in the comments. So,
and if you want us to do Army of Darkness, we just need one commenter.
So literally,
we need just one. I wish a commenter would. I wish you would.
Letter writing campaign or anything.
You viewers are scared to comment it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No more.
Okay.
So from Telly, Dash, and myself, the Shoot, Punch, Kick crew, we thank you, and we will see you next time. Salute.